Welcome to Art Ed Radio, the podcast for art teachers. This show is produced by the Art of Education, and I'm your host, Tim Bogatz. We talked last week about those department killers, the teachers who drag their program down. Sometimes they do it unwittingly, sometimes they do it deliberately. And while the conversation between Andrew and I didn't take a negative turn per se, I do want to talk a little bit on the more positive side of what you can do to help build your art program. Today you're going to hear a conversation between Shannon Bell and me. Shannon is an awesome senior instructor here at the Art of Ed, and she has built an art program from scratch in 3 different places. Before you hear from Shannon, though, I want to share a little bit of my own story. What my program looked like when I took over, what I did to try to improve the situation and grow the art department. And it's just one story, one example, but I hope it can inform some of your thinking and maybe help you out a little bit if you find yourself in a similar situation. Now, after 2 years of traveling as an elementary art teacher, I was fortunate enough to take over one of the high school jobs in my district. And let me tell you, I had no idea what I was walking into. I don't want to turn this into a sob story, but suffice it to say, a lot of years of apathy had left me with a program and an art room that was frankly a disaster. And I had to decide how to deal with it because, in essence, I was starting a program from scratch. And I made the decision to pour almost all of my energy into the sophomores and freshmen who were in intro courses, drawing 1 courses, and making sure that they had a great experience, learned a lot, eventually signed up for more classes. In short, those were the kids that I wanted to build my program around. And eventually we did exactly that. Those kids loved their art experience, and a lot of the kids who weren't sure at first came around to see who I was and what I was trying to do. But that's not the case with everyone. Because when you're taking over a program, there are going to be basically 3 reactions from students. Okay, and this is especially true at the high school level. First, you have those kids who are excited to see the change. Okay, you also have kids who are not happy at all. Okay, and third, you have those who are on the fence. And sometimes the key to getting kids to buy in is convincing those kids who are still on the fence to actually cash out. And I hate to say this, but I let some kids go, gave them the option to drop the class, and in some case actually push them to try and get them to drop the class. And honestly, once your program is established, I really despise that action, as we talked about last week, and I still regret doing it myself. But as a young teacher who needed to get those kids out of there, it couldn't have been a better option for me. Because, like I said, I focused my attention on developing a good curriculum, establishing standards for work ethic and quality, and building relationships with those kids who wanted to be there. And I couldn't have those kids who didn't want to be there undermining relationships, undermining standards and expectations, and undermining the community I'm trying to build in my classroom. Because in the end, you need those in your program to want to be a part of what you're doing. And that's something I want to talk to Shannon about. When you are starting a program from scratch, how do you get people to want to be a part of that? How do you get administrators and colleagues and families and kids on board with what you're doing? She has a lot of great ideas. And even though most of the interview focuses on the big picture, I do want to recommend something that can help you with the day-to-day logistics as well. And if you're taking over a new program next year, or even if you're just looking to revamp some of what you're doing currently, you need to spend some time this summer in AOE's Designing Your Art Curriculum course. Not only do you learn about the how, but you will more importantly learn about the why of designing your curriculum. It's absolutely my favorite course to teach. You have a chance to work with a group of other art teachers, share your ideas, develop lessons, and put together some amazing plans for your next school year. Okay, Designing Your Art Curriculum is a 3-credit-hour course that runs over 5 weeks, and there are new sections starting in June, July, and August. Go to theartofed.com/courses to check it out and see if that is the course you need. And finally, one last note before we get to the interview. This is a pre-recorded talk that took place when Shannon and I were in New York City. So, like the episode with Matt Christensen from a few weeks ago, you'll hear some background noise and some static. But again, I love that sound, and I hope it adds a little bit to the conversation. Let's go ahead and get it started right now. All right, so I am here recording live at the NAEA convention with Shannon Bell. And Shannon, I'll just start how I start every show. How are you?
I'm great.
Good. Glad to hear it. We are going to be talking about building a program and all the things that go into it. But can you just tell us a little bit about you, where you're from, your teaching experience before we dive into the interview?
Absolutely. So I am from Trenton, New Jersey. I taught in New Jersey for 9 years. K-12, I worked 3 years in a special education school, an alternative school setting, and then I taught 5 years in a K-5 school. And then I moved to Indianapolis, and I taught for a semester in Indianapolis Public Schools, and now I am a graduate instructor for the Art of Education.
All right, cool. So one of the reasons I want to talk to you is you have this big variety of experience. And you were telling me that, everywhere you've been, you've had to sort of build a program. So can you just, I guess, summarize really quickly, like, what do you mean by building a program? Like, what are you trying to do when you come in to a new school and kind of take over a department or a program?
Yeah, for sure. So my first 2 jobs in New Jersey, I literally walked into districts that just didn't have an art program at all. My first job never had an art program, and then my second job didn't have one for several years, and so I kind of came in and rebuilt that one.
Okay, and so I guess when you come in, you're building a program from scratch. Like, where do you even begin? Like, do you start with your curriculum, your lessons? You're trying to figure out just what supplies you have? Like, what does it look like when you're starting something from scratch?
I think the first thing it comes to is, like, what the budget actually looks like, because that drives the whole curriculum. So I really started with, like, a basic supply list. Like, what do I need to get a couple of projects off the ground at the beginning of a school year? So I think it starts out super basic. I mean, I'm going to start with elements and principles and drawing and painting. And then we kind of go from there. It's, building lessons and then starting to fit it into a curriculum. It's working kind of from smaller picture to bigger picture, I guess.
Yeah, I like that. And I think that's an important way to look at things. And so has that process sort of worked for you each time that you've moved and each time that you've built stuff up? Like, is there, I guess, a common thread to what you see at schools when you're taking them over and what you try and do once you get in there?
I don't know if there's really a common thread between the 3 districts. Each one was really different in terms of kind of demographic and socioeconomic status. But, maybe the common thread is sort of the end goal. So what I'm looking for at the end is students who find at least one experience through the year that they're really excited about. Maybe they find one medium that really, kind of they hit their groove with. And then you're kind of looking to sort of build the school culture. And so maybe that was my common thread is, building a school culture that values the arts.
Yeah, I like that. And I actually want to dive in there. I wanted to talk to you. You mentioned the excitement for kids and kind of getting them, those memorable experiences. So I guess, can you describe kind of what the mindset is of kids who haven't had art in a while or haven't had art before, what you're trying to get them to do or get them excited about, and I guess just what kind of a mindset do you want to develop in them, like as you go throughout the year?
I think it's really dependent on the age group. So when you're building a program with elementary school students, their buy-in is pretty easy. Generally, they're excited to have a class where, they can play with something messy and make a mess, and it's not that big of a deal. my more challenging experiences are trying to build that program with maybe like fifth grade and beyond. Introducing a 16-year-old kid to art for the first time is crazy because there's no background, there's no confidence. So you're really kind of taking very basic art ideas, but not allowing them to feel like it's getting dumbed down for them. So it's like, how do I teach these super basic things in a more complex and engaging way?
Yeah, and do you think that like engagement is the biggest thing that you're going for? Like, I guess I'm thinking for you as a teacher, is it more important to get your curriculum across and teach kids, what artists do, or are you just trying to get them excited about the experience and like learning to love art?
Ooh, I think when you're building a program, you need that engagement first. Especially with your older kids, they're not going to buy into your curriculum. They're not going to buy into art history connections or any of that if they're not engaged from the beginning. So that's why I think it's kind of almost like working backwards. You can't look at your whole entire year's goals. Your first goal is kind of building a relationship and getting them comfortable in an art room before they can really dive into, kind of bigger art principles and design aspects.
Okay, that's really cool. Just a lot of good thoughts there. But I kind of want to move on a little bit to, I guess, what you do with your colleagues, like your administration, the people that you are working with. Like, when you come into a school that hasn't had art in a while or hasn't had art ever, how do you get the staff, how do you get your admins to realize that this is important, this is something we need to support?
That, I think, is maybe my favorite part of it. At the beginning, it always feels like an uphill battle. You might come in to an administrator that kind of, makes little comments that might devalue your program, or, other teachers who, they ask you to make birthday cards during art class. And so it can feel kind of defeating at the beginning, but I think once you get the kids on board and once you start showing them that like we are learning big stuff in here and we're making some awesome things, it gains so much momentum and it just spreads throughout the school. And I think, the first couple months of that are really, really challenging. But then once you get a little bit of buy-in, and collaborating with other teachers, I think really helps with that. So gaining buy-in from staff and admin, I think, is a process. It's slow at the beginning. And then once you start getting people on board, it's just going to flourish.
Okay, so I guess my question to follow up on that would be that what are some strategies? Like, what would you suggest people do to help with that buy-in? You mentioned collaboration, but what are some of the other things that you can do to really get staff on board? Like, if you're giving people advice, what are the concrete steps that they need to do to get their staff more involved with art or seeing what's happening in the art room?
So a few things that I've done is, you want to show other staff members that you're committed to what they're doing as well. And then it'll start to become a two-way street. So if somebody says, we're looking for volunteers to help with family literacy night, it's like, awesome, I would love to be a part of that. Here's an art and literacy connection station that I want to run. Or I ran a few like after school art classes with the staff in my school. Like, hey, do you want to learn how to make a pinch pot and a pencil holder? Come to the art room at the end of the school day and we'll work on that. So that was kind of a cool way to get to know the staff outside of the actual school day. I think it's also really valuable to reach out and say, what are you guys working on in your classroom? I want to piggyback on your idea. So if they're studying polar animals, like, great, we are also going to study polar animals and their habitats, and we're going to, look at nonfiction text and draw from that. Or, kind of something that's going to show them that their curriculum is important to you and we can link up so that the school isn't running in individual pieces. It's running as like a well-oiled machine.
Yeah, I like that. That's some really good advice. But then do you ever feel like you're in danger of losing what you want to do as, an art teacher? Like, if you are giving up art for art's sake in order to do these collaborations, like, is that a balancing act for you? Does it concern you at all?
I think it's certainly a balancing act. What I've found is there's so many ways to kind of integrate the arts into other things. And it doesn't have to be a full arts integration where you're giving up your entire art curriculum to teach other subjects. But if you can kind of pull bits and pieces in and show that, we really are teaching a whole brain. We're not teaching art, and then we're teaching math, and then we're teaching science. Everything's kind of working together because that's how it's going to go in their life anyway. So, I think it is a balancing act. I'm certainly teaching a lot of art content within those lessons, but I don't feel like I'm all the way, giving up what's really important to me and what I'm passionate about as well.
No, that's really well said. I like that. I guess the next place I want to go is what happens when we start to move outside the classroom, because I know for me, whenever, I'm trying to build my program, trying to get more attention for what we do, a huge thing for me is how to advocate outside of school, whether that be with families, with businesses, with whatever. How do you get parents to buy in? How do you get people outside the school to buy in? And why do you think that's so important?
I love this. So I feel like parent buy-in is probably the second biggest thing next to student engagement. It depends on the district that I'm working in. That kind of affects the way that I'm going to try to contact the families. I'm a big fan of social media. So I have a classroom Instagram. And what I found is the students will follow it. The parents will then follow it. If your school has a hashtag, you can kind of jump in on that. And then I even post something right outside my classroom that says, hey, follow me on Twitter and Instagram. And even if it's just taking a picture of the dirty paint tray at the end of the day and saying wow, we had a crazy day in art today, hashtag creativity. You're just kind of showing that we did something today, and you're reminding people that art is happening every single day. So I found social media to be awesome. I also am a huge fan of Artsonia. And I think a digital portfolio is a really cool way for parents to see what the kids are doing. Everybody has that conversation what happened in school today? And 99 out of 100 kids are going to say nothing. But if the parents are getting that email with a piece of artwork, or maybe, you uploaded their artist statement, it gives them something to talk about. I've had parents email me and say, we talked about art at the dinner table last night. And that's your great moment of yes, we are doing something and people care. And that's, I think, what really gets your program to take off.
Yeah, that's really cool. And I like those strategies a lot. Just one other kind of thing with that. Do you invite parents physically into your room too? Or is that something that you want to show what's going on? Or do you actually want them in the room? Do you think that helps with buy-in?
I'm sure it does. I'm not a big parent volunteer person. I'll bring in volunteers for big projects. So one year I decided to tie-dye t-shirts for 550 students in 1 week. So that week I brought in some parent volunteers, and then they did all the laundry. But and for hanging an art show and stuff, I did try to have parent volunteers to upload Artsonia work, but I kind of found that it was better to sort of teach my older students how to do that, so they're really taking that ownership in the classroom. Personally, I don't use a whole lot of parent volunteers, but that's just my prerogative, my choice.
Cool. Yeah, I was just curious because I know so many people have different ideas on that. So one last question, though, before we get you out of here. Once you've built your program to a really good level, you're happy with, where you are, can you sort of describe what that looks like? What does your program look like on a day-to-day basis when kids are involved, staff is involved, parents are buying in? What should we be shooting for?
That's a great question. Man, I think it's going to really come down to, little moments in the classroom where kids will say, oh, I was watching TV and I noticed, this was happening, or I saw famous artwork that we've talked about. Or, I taught my little sister that color mixing happens this way. I think it's when the students are really, kind of taking what you've taught them and then applying it outside of the art room. It's pretty easy to get kids to make art and think art in an art classroom. But when they're making connections outside of your room and outside of your program, I think that's when it gets really exciting. They're showing you what they made at home. They're going to art camps. They're asking if you know anybody who teaches painting. It's showing that you've kind of planted a seed and they're ready to take it to the next level. And I think that's really, the sign of an art program that's thriving.
That's awesome and very well said. So, Shannon, thank you very much for joining us. It's been great talking to you.
Hey, my pleasure.
I hope that you enjoyed hearing about things from both perspectives, Shannon's ideas on elementary and mine on secondary. And the common theme, I think, that both she and I talked about is getting buy-in. In high school, that's predominantly going to be the kids in your classes. And in elementary, Shannon talked about both the school community and the larger community. And she gave a lot of ideas that hopefully can help you if you find yourself in a situation where you are starting a program from scratch. But before we get out of here today, I want to give a shout out to my partner in crime, Mr. Andrew McCormick, because I know he's too humble to do it himself. If you listen regularly, you know he moved to a new school this year, and it's been a pretty rough time for him. And if only he had listened to this podcast last summer, maybe we could have helped him. But as bad as he makes it sound sometimes, he is having some success. Andrew is being recognized at his school for doing an incredible job of connecting with students, helping them feel welcome, and creating a classroom environment that helps kids learn, helps kids belong, and leads to an amazing amount of learning. So kudos to him for that recognition. But I don't want him to get too big of a head, so we're going to talk about it next week and see if what he's doing is really that important. Okay, spoiler alert, it is. But we should talk about why. So make sure you give us a listen next week when we discuss whether or not we should care what our students think about us. I'm pretty sure it's going to be a good one. Art Ed Radio is produced by The Art of Education with audio engineering from Michael Crocker. Remember that you can sign up for our email list at artedradio.com. Also, I want to remind you that you can always email Andrew and me at radioguys@theartofed.com. We love hearing your feedback, both positive and negative, and it always helps us improve the show. Thank you for listening.